Part 2, Takeaways and Conclusions. Number 1. The groups that are continuing to organize protests and vandalisms in Santa Fe and elsewhere that target our historical treasures and the Spanish culture are radical by the very definition, to the point of openly calling for our current society and country to burn to the ground. They themselves, as well as their sister organizations, openly brag about using Marxism and socialism mixed with localized agitations as a tool to eventually usher in communism. And yes, I'm talking about the type of communism that all our grandparents had seen and were terrified of. These groups include Red Nation, and through support of, and by proxy, the Three Sisters Collective, among others. Number 2. These and similar groups are to a modern, evolving, and growing society what an autoimmune disease is to the body. They are rogue, sick, confused individual cells that have grouped together and attack otherwise healthy cells and organs, completely convinced that they are doing the right thing. If left unchecked and unchallenged, their destructive ways will continue to harm our community. For our purposes, in our local community, this is evidenced by the purposeful mistelling of Spanish history, hatred of Spanish culture, symbols and celebrations of Spanish culture, and things that have overall been of great benefit, in addition to an open desire to tear everything down, which in other words is basically anti-culture. This has resulted in escalated attacks against history, culture, and traditions. For more on this type of cultural phenomenon, I recommend a book called The Black Swan, where author Nassim details the mechanics of how a radical minority can steer a well-intended majority population in a self-destructive way. Number 3. These groups organize with other similar groups in a way that gives them support in numbers and financial backing. This results in things like additional protesters being bussed in, often paid, and called in from far out of town to give Santa Fe protests the appearance of strong local support that's not really there. This is also effective in intimidating our community, as well as confusion when coupled with support from some locally elected leaders using words and phrases like fairness, justice, coming together, etc. Number 4. These groups use various strategies to attract locals and well-meaning individuals, convince them that they are fighting for a good, just cause and against a historical evil that has somehow gone unaddressed, and turn them into radical activists that stay in their own targeted towns and localities. The worst kinds of activists are the ones that honestly believe that they're doing good when the actual results are the opposite. Number 5. Some of the driving forces for these trends are taught and encouraged from our education system, including UNM, where some of the founders and leaders of these extremist identitarian groups teach as professors. They encourage a new type of thinking that is completely intolerant of other perspectives and work to attack what they disagree with. Listen to this conversation an activist recently had with Mayor Weber.
This is a dangerous structure culturally for this community. This is a physical manifestation and representation of the physical danger that the concept of this structure poses for this community.
More on this in a later part of this series. Number 6. Red Nation, the Three Sisters Collective, and activists are not going to stop easily. They have openly said for years that they are going to work inside and outside the legal systems to chip away at and completely change our history, culture, and city itself. In fact, they literally want it all for themselves. While this goal is ridiculous on its face, they have proven good on their word to consistently work to continue this end. Their goals are extreme, from aspirations of aiding larger groups to bring socialism to the United States, then graduating to communism, elimination of police in all forms, even to the point of wanting to reallocate the ownership of all of the land that our city sits on. These goals are a pipe dream. Achieving these goals are extremely unlikely in the highest degree, yet they repeatedly promise to not stop until they achieve these. Given the current city government and state's leadership and methods of dealing with this, the result can only be the continuation of the same pattern. Likely years of this agitation and chipping away of the historical Santa Fe and Spanish cultures. This end result is racist against the Spanish culture. Number 7. These extremist groups often send mixed signals, using words like democracy, freedom, justice, and at the same time, using words and phrases that are in direct opposition, like love of communism, calls for elimination of any law enforcement, jail, or punishment for criminals, calls to end all personal ownership of anything. This is and has historically been a commonly used tactic to distract and confuse by groups whose success is dependent on distraction and deception to succeed. They have to lie in order to be successful because their philosophy is that bad. Nobody would go for it on its face. Number 8. The results of these extremist groups and individuals have been harmful to the Spanish, Native American, and general Santa Fe cultures. No question. Number 9. These groups are in process of taking power and voice away from the rightful leaders and governors of our Native American pueblos and communities by stealing the spotlight, claiming to speak for Native Americans generally, and subverting past decisions and statements by official Native American leadership. In my opinion, in addition to an outright attack on Spanish culture, Santa Fe culture, and history, they also demonstrate aggression against established Native American leadership, as these groups also want to eventually revamp Native American life, even who can be considered Native American, and even what the Pueblos are called. They want to take over everything. If you're a local activist in Santa Fe, I want you to hear this, because you are directly working to subvert leadership in all communities in our triculture city.